I benefited from competing with boys for a long, long duration during my career. I think you can see that in the way I play. But I think if you made every girl play in a full boys team, we would lose a lot of talent.
Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast, The Bold Tackle. We are your hosts, Sophie Howard and Oliver Howard, and we are ready to tackle bold topics in sport,
highlight the women's football industry,
and speak about the unspoken.
If you are ready to get an insight into what really goes on behind the scenes, join us on our journey and listen in
to The Bold Tackle. Hi and welcome back to a new episode of our podcast, The Bold Tackle. And hi Soph, lovely to have you here.
Hi Ollie, nice to see you again. You've had a busy week, haven't you?
I've had an okay week. I was in Frankfurt this morning. We recorded a podcast for FundView, but other than that, it's been okay. I had a pretty busy week last week. We have an event tomorrow, and April is insane for me. I think within 3 days, I'm in Cologne, Heidelberg, Munich, and then Stuttgart. So that's going to be very, very busy. So in comparison to that, this week is actually pretty easy going. How is it on your side?
Yeah, pretty fine. Back to normal club rhythm, I'd say. You get used to it, as you said. You just get used to the daily schedule, I guess.
How was this weekend?
Frustrating, to say the least. We never played the way we can, whether that was in possession or out of possession. And sometimes you just have to accept that it was nowadays. I think it's very promising that despite us not playing well, we still should have come out of it with a point, with a draw, which is promising looking towards April. An early goal that we conceded cost us the game pretty much. But in the end, we just didn't perform on the day. And sometimes you just have to accept that. It's not good enough, of course, and we won't accept the performance, but sometimes you just have to move on as quickly as you can.
But I think there's a lot to take away from that and a lot to learn for the semis that are coming up. So for the league, it's probably not the best performance you could have had, not the best result, obviously, and not the result you were aiming for, but something you can really take a positive from and learn from, and how maybe not to do it when you meet Tottenham again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, certainly. I think, as you said, not only did the game give us a lot of, I guess, lessons we can learn from, but tactically it gave us a lot of pictures that we can take into the next couple of weeks and then into the semis against Spurs. So in some way we have to try and find the positives in the disappointing result.
Besides your daily business, you had an appearance this week as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I had a player's appearance at I think it was under 13s county final, which I attended.
Does that happen very often? Do they book you or?
They request a player from the club, basically, and we all do them. It's not just myself. We all do these player appearances, and our guy that's in charge of these appearances came up and asked me if I was okay to do it. I think partially the reason why he asked me is because it was 7 o'clock at night, and it was just around the corner from mine. So basically, it probably made most sense for me to go, and I didn't mind it. It was a rainy day and a very muddy day, but in the end, it was important, I think, for us to show the club's face, so to speak, to represent the club. It was the county final for Leicestershire and Rutland County, and that's obviously, we're part of that in a way. So it's just kind of what we do.
And what did you have to do at that appearance?
Well, all appearances are a little bit different, but on this one, because it was the cup final, I had to present the trophy, I guess, and the medals after the game and before the game. The teams, do you know what? I don't want to say it's bizarre, but I just have never experienced this. But the team's captains had to introduce their team to myself and 2 sponsors that were present, which I felt like was quite daunting for the players. But anyways,
why?
I'm not sure. I don't know. So I was introduced to every single player that started the game. When you line up next to the rest, and we went through the whole team and they introduced their players. But that was the first part, so it basically was like a handshake thing. And then during the game, just went out and watched, and wouldn't say we mingled a lot, but we just sat in the crowd, I guess. And then after the game, we presented the medals and the trophy. Typically, the player appearances are more Q&As for the younger players, but this one was solely presenting the trophy.
A little bit different. If you watched the match, what was the quality of the match like, and how do you think maybe has the grassroots and the youth teams evolved compared to your times?
It's very difficult for me to compare the level that it is at now and the level it was at when I was under 13, because I can't really remember what my level was like. I think the biggest difference was I was in a fully boys team, so I was competed with the boys. We certainly also had these county cups, different tournaments, different leagues we competed in. But as I mentioned, the biggest difference was when I was at that age. I can't say there were no girls' teams, because not long after I started, they created a girls' team. But because I had started with the boys, I always stuck with the boys. That's just kind of how my path went.
But the quality of, I need to be careful what I say here. But the quality of the women's teams and the girls' teams was not to the same standards as the boys were. So for you to develop and to learn the most, you had to play at the boys.
Yeah, certainly. I think back in the day, and I mean, like when I started, the quality of girls' football, as you mentioned, certainly wasn't good, wasn't great. Partially due to a low number of girls wanting to play, so you can imagine the competition, and therefore quality wasn't as great. But also the coaching wasn't as great. Often it was enthusiastic dads that probably didn't have a coaching background. And fair play, there were probably most likely volunteers. And I think we've got a lot to thank volunteers for, because otherwise often grassroots teams wouldn't exist. But for me, the best decision almost was to play with the boys. I'd say a big issue there also was the quality of coaching, but at least I had to compete with boys where their head was probably more into football. And I always had to prove myself on the pitch and off the pitch in that environment.
I'm not sure what it's like today, but then you were allowed to be this little bit older than the boys. Was it 1 year, 2 years? Did you play with the same age, or were you a little bit older than them?
For the most part, I was the same age. I think the latter 1, max 2 years, I was a year older. So I think you could be 1 calendar year older than the boys if you're a girl.
What do you think about that rule?
I think it's good, because most of the times the boundaries in terms of why you can't compete with the boys anymore is physically and physiologically, not so much technically and tactically. So I guess to make up for that gap, hopefully that 1 year gives you the opportunity to lift that barrier. It gets to a point where you simply physically can't compete and keep up with the boys, and that's when I had to make the move to women's football.
At what age was that? Because you often get this women's national team or top women team plays against the 16-year-olds, and you can already there see a difference in physicality. When was the time you switched?
I made the full switch to women's football when I was 15 and a half, almost 16. That's when I moved to Hoffenheim from my local team. Before I had moved, I was playing both. I was playing the under-15s with the boys, and I think it was the under-18s then with the girls. That just kept me going in a sense of loads of games and loads of sessions.
And how did they compare?
Oh, the level with the boys was much higher then already. But again, this is 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. The level of women's football then wasn't where it is now. So it'd be hard for me to compare it to now.
But do you think that's changed? Do you think girls could play in boys' teams longer now. Do you think most girls should play in boys' teams until a certain point?
The word should is probably the tricky one, because I can only speak for myself, and it massively benefited me. I benefited from competing with boys for a long, long duration during my career. I think you can see that in the way I play.
But
I think if you made every girl play in a full boys team, we would lose a lot of talent, because it isn't easy to be the only girl in the boys team. And that's more the social aspect. It's more of how the social life, how the group dynamic affects you as a player. And I think we'd have a lot of dropouts if you made every girl play with boys.
can you talk about that experience a little bit? Why was it so difficult for you? Did you need time to be accepted, like Janice told us in one of the episodes? Or was it just that you had to go into different changing room? Why was it so difficult?
I guess I was quite fortunate that even from a young age, all my mates were always boys. So it wasn't like it hindered me, but I could see that minor challenges within my career, and I'll explain in a sec, could be big challenges for others, I guess. Yeah, you mentioned the whole changing room thing. Back then we were changing in the same changing room. Like, that wasn't even a thing until we got older. And to be fair, we had a group of guys that were very respectful. So we got changed first, and then they came and they got changed, we got out. And that's how it worked with showering after the game as well. They were very respectful, and those were like my best pals when I was growing up. So that group dynamic worked really well. Another big advantage I had is in the later stages, up until the final 2 years playing with boys, I was playing with Sam, my twin sister. So there was always two of us. I also benefited of that, I have to say. But you are the odd one. You are the one that everyone looks at when you walk onto that pitch, or even when your teams arrives to the pitch. The opposition looks at you, not all the other guys, and that can, I guess, be quite daunting. For me, I managed to turn that into almost fuel to prove them wrong when I step on that pitch. And most often it worked, but that can be quite daunting. And I guess if you don't have that, and I always mention it, the love for the game, that in the end motivates you, and that is your reason why you play football, that could be a challenge and that could be a barrier.
Was it just a little bit more pressure you got by them looking at you, by you wanting to prove them that you had a place in the team and on the pitch?
The biggest pressure I was always under was put on by myself. When I was younger, had the fear of disappointing myself and failing. And that was always the biggest pressure I was under. Yes, there was added pressure I put on myself to prove other people wrong and show the boys at that age that I was here for a reason, that I was good enough to be on that pitch. But I wouldn't say that was the main aspect of the pressure I put myself under.
Very interesting. Can you also talk a little bit about your teams, being Leicester, being Hoffenheim, then being the national team? Most girls, you're one of the older ones, obviously, in the teams now. You're not old, but you're one of the older ones. Did most of the players your age and older all play in boys' teams? And what's it like with the younger girls, 25, 26, 27, or younger than that?
I think for the younger ones, you mentioned 25, 26, I think even younger though, the generation that is coming through, I don't think they know what it's like to play with boys only. Fortunately for them, their women's football has advanced that much that there's girls' academies, girls' grassroots teams, that they don't necessarily have to play with boys. When I was younger, I had no choice. For me to start playing football, I had to play with boys. But I think everyone knows that the reason I started playing football is because I idolized you when I was younger. Sometimes I still do, but especially when I was younger. So that's why I played football or started playing football. So for me, it was normal to be around boys. For me, I didn't know any different. But now I think the generation coming through, I don't think they know maybe what it is like to play with boys. They only know coming through the ranks in terms of women's and girls' teams.
What's the point you're trying to make?
That it's hard to compare, because I don't know how many people have gone through playing with boys and how many haven't. I think it's very difficult to compare careers in general, because maybe someone my age has played with girls only, because maybe in their region or their country women's football was more advanced. I don't know.
Looking at today and looking at the possibilities girls have when they start off playing football, if you could go back and be a young player today, what would you do? Would you play for the men's or would you play for the women's?
Knowing how playing with the boys has benefited me, I would try and play with the boys, but only because I know that it worked for me. If I didn't have that hindsight, I don't know. I think because now the majority just goes into the pathway of playing with girls and therefore women, maybe I would got peer pressured, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's probably the easier way.
Yeah, but easier is not always better, is it?
No, I totally agree. But obviously there's no black and white here. Both can be applied, and both ways, obviously, you can become professional. I was just trying to find out what helps your development most, because you can. It's also a very difficult sport to look at, because with tennis, for example, you have a coach, and you might spar against men, and it'll help you improve a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's a one-on-one. With football, in the team sport, where it can become physical, it's just a little bit harder.
Yeah, I think because there's so many more components to football than just the physical side. For a majority of the development, we can not only get away with, but we can benefit of playing with the other gender. In a sport where the physical factor is like so high, whether that's athletics or even tennis, in a way, you would never find, unless it's a mixed double, but you'd never find, as you said, a woman playing against a man. First of all, it's an individual sport and not a team sport. But second of all, if you take athletics, the physical component of the sport is so much higher than in football.
So for another aspect that just came to my mind, which you need to consider when we talk about this, is would the woman get the practice and be on the pitch and play in the men's team? Because we spoke about the age difference you can have, but at a certain point, you just can't compete against, I'll say, grown men. And at that point, as you said, it's probably better to switch to the women's team, to have this play time and be on the pitch. And I think that's not allowed to be underestimated. As you said, maybe a lot of talent will get lost if everyone took that way, because you need to be that much better to be able to play in a boys' team.
Yes and no. Yes, you have to be able to compete physically, but also technically, tactically, whatnot. And therefore, a lot of talent would get lost. But are we fulfilling our full potential by potentially not playing with the boys and therefore competing with players that are better physically and everything else? Are we then maybe missing the opportunity to reach our potential? That's kind of a question that I don't think we'll ever be able to answer.
No, a very good open question at the end to maybe think about, because we shouldn't downplay the development on the women's side, but maybe that is that extra 1% you can get. That makes it easier when you do go professional, and that makes your play more individual and unique to you, because you learn differently.
Yeah, and I think because I was at a physical disadvantage, I had to make sure the other aspects of my game were spot on. to be able to compete. And then what I mentioned at the very beginning, the social aspect, the mental resilience aspect, I think I've benefited from all that throughout my journey playing with boys. And I can see that now. I think my mental resilience is probably one of my biggest strengths that you can't measure in a way. But that came from early ages.
Yeah, and that's what was built in those times. And the second thing was probably going in without fear, which we see in all your heading and tackles where you go in head first.
Yeah, there's an aspect of no fear. When people ask me whether it hurts or whether I'm ever scared, I always say to them that the moment you are scared, it will hurt. The moment you don't attack the ball and you let the ball attack you, or same with an opponent, it will hurt. So you best go head first and attack the ball, attack the player. But I think it's also a matter of caring a lot in terms of what my job is. And in the end, my job is not only, but first and foremost, to defend the goal. And I'll do everything I can to make that happen.
Great. What a lovely discussion. It's taken us somewhere which I obviously didn't expect again. But it's something to think about, and I will after this podcast, about how development is. And obviously with my daughter, I don't know which sport she goes into, but maybe one day I'll have to make that decision.
Yeah, you might. I'm predicting your daughter to have a very high variety in sports throughout her childhood. I can already see that happening. And I can't wait for the days that you have to stand on the tennis pitch or football pitch in the rain watching your daughter play.
Yeah, and I hope by then you've finally got your pro license and you'll be coaching her.
At the under 8.
Be a good trainer then. Thank you very much, Soph, for the great discussion. Thank you for being on here again. I'll see you again next week, huh?
Yeah, you're very welcome once again. And I will see you next week. It's 1 week closer to summer when I'm going to see you again, real life.
And it's 1 week closer to the semis, Soph. That's what's important.
Look at me looking ahead to summer. You certainly got the priorities right. Yes, everyone, I'll take it back. 1 week closer to the semis.
Yeah. And I am hoping that you make it to the finals, because then we'll come and watch.
Oh, you come in? Oh, that's
if you make it, we'll try to come.
That is certainly extra incentive, extra little bit of motivation. Because Dad said the same. Maybe I can get the whole fam over and we can have a reunion.
Hopefully we'll get tickets.
I'll make sure of that. But first we have to get the job done to make that happen.
First you need to get the job done so everyone can see the background. It's time to go to sleep, Soph. Thank you for the call again. See everyone else next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening again.